On a dying world at the far edge of known space, an entire army of hardened alien soldiers broke formation and ran. They were not cowards. Every soldier there had survived worse battles before. But this was different. This time, something walked out of the dust that made warriors 3,000 years into their service turn pale. According to Coalition battle records, the retreat order came from General Vorik Thane, commander known across 12 systems for never backing down. He gave the order the second the beast appeared. Every soldier obeyed. Every soldier, except one. A single human stood still. Then he did something no alien had ever seen a living creature do in front of that beast. He walked forward, toward it, alone. What happened in the next 10 minutes would be studied by Coalition scientists for years. It would change how every species in the galaxy looked at humanity. And it would teach General Vorik Thane a truth far more terrifying than any monster. Because the beast was dangerous. Everyone already knew that. But the beast was predictable. It followed rules older than memory itself. The human did not. By the end of this story, you will understand 3 things. First, why a general more powerful than a small army feared one unarmed man more than a monster built to kill. Second, a secret about human nature that most humans do not even know about themselves. Third, what really happened when that soldier reached the beast, and why it changed the direction of an entire war. But the truth behind this will shock you. Let me show you exactly how this happened. The planet was called Outpost Ember 9. It sat on the edge of Colindrian space, a red, cracked world with a thin sky and 2 pale moons. Nothing grew there anymore. The ground had been broken by war for almost a year. Ember 9 mattered because of what was buried under it. Coalition scanners had found rare mineral veins deep in the crust, enough to power a fleet for a decade. 3 different powers wanted it. The Colindrian Alliance held it. A rebel faction wanted to take it. And somewhere in the deep canyons to the east, something older than both of them had been sleeping. The Colindrian Alliance was not human. Its people stood nearly 8 feet tall, with long limbs and pale gray skin built for cold worlds. They had been fighting wars among the stars for over 1,000 years, long before Earth ever picked up a radio signal from space. When first contact happened, the Alliance did not expect much from humanity. Humans were small. Humans were fragile. Humans had only been in space for a few generations. But humans were useful. They were clever with machines. They adapted fast. And most importantly, in a galaxy short on soldiers, humans were willing to fight. So a small division of the Human Expeditionary Corps was assigned to Ember 9, attached to General Vorik Thane's command. Sergeant Ethan Cole was one of them. Ethan was 29 years old. He was not the strongest soldier in his unit. He was not the fastest either. His file described him as steady. That was the word his old commanding officer had used. Back on Earth, during training. Steady under pressure. Slow to panic. Quick to think. Nobody on Ember 9 expected Ethan to matter much. He ran supply routes. He checked equipment. He kept quiet during briefings. For 6 months, that was his entire war. Then, 3 days before this story begins, Coalition scouts found tracks near the Eastern Canyon. Massive tracks, each one wider than a grown man is tall. The scouts called it in, then went silent. Search teams found their gear the next morning. They found nothing else. General Vorik Thane had seen many things in his long career, but he had never seen tracks like these. He ordered his xenobiology team to study old Caulindrian records, the ones written before written history, back when Caulindrian ancestors still lived on open plains and hid in caves from predators larger than anything alive today. What the team found made the general's blood run cold, if a Caulindrian's blood could do such a thing. The old records spoke of a creature called the Draxo. Ancient hunters described it the same way, across cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. A beast built like a battering ram, covered in armor thicker than steel, with horns that could split stone. It did not hunt for food alone. It hunted anything that ran. Running triggered it. The faster something fled, the harder the Draxol chased. For over 2,000 years, no living Caulindrian had seen one. Scientists believed the species was extinct, wiped out during the Great Cold centuries. But the tracks near the canyon told a different story. Somehow, on this forgotten planet, one had survived. General Vorik Thane made a choice that day. He would not risk his soldiers against a myth turned real. He ordered patrols reduced. He ordered the Eastern Canyon marked as forbidden ground. For 2 days, the plan worked. Nothing crossed the line. On the 3rd day, everything changed. It happened just after dawn, when the light on Ember 9 turned the whole sky a burnt orange color. A supply convoy, the same kind Ethan had guarded 100 times before, crossed too close to the canyon edge. Nobody meant to break the rule. The route had simply drifted over months of patrols, the way routines always do when nobody is watching closely enough. The ground began to shake before anyone saw it coming. Then it appeared, breaking through a ridge of red stone like the ridge was made of paper. It was enormous, far larger than the old records described. Its hide was the color of iron left out in the rain, thick with old scars. Horns curved from its skull, each one longer than a grown man. Its eyes locked onto the convoy the moment it saw movement. Someone screamed. Someone else fired a warning shot into the air. That was the worst thing they could have done. The Draxol charged. General Vorik Thane heard the reports over comms within seconds. He had exactly one order to give, and he gave it immediately. The same order any commander trained in Caulindrian military doctrine would give when facing something this old and this dangerous. Fall back. Full retreat. Do not engage. Every soldier on that field began to run, exactly as trained, exactly as instinct demanded. Vehicles turned. Weapons were left behind. Soldiers who had fought pirates and rebels and worse without flinching sprinted across broken ground like the ancestors in those old records, fleeing something their bodies remembered, even if their minds had never seen it before. All of them ran, except for one soldier, standing near the back of the convoy, who did not move at all. Ethan Cole had been checking a supply crate when the ground started shaking. He looked up in time to see the Draxol break through the ridge, and for 1 full second, his body wanted exactly what every other soldier's body wanted. Run! But something stopped him. It was not bravery. Not exactly. It was a memory. Growing up, Ethan's father had worked as a park ranger in Montana, in the mountains where grizzly bears still roamed free. Ethan had spent summers there as a boy, learning things most kids never learn. His father had one rule that mattered more than any other. If you meet a bear, do not run. Running turns you into prey. Standing your ground, making yourself look calm and large, gives the bear a reason to hesitate. Most bear attacks were not really attacks. They were bluff charges, tests, moments where the animal was deciding whether you were dangerous or whether you were dinner. Ethan had never faced anything like the Draxol. Nobody on Earth ever had. But as he watched his fellow soldiers scatter in every direction, and as he watched the beast's eyes track every single one of them, an old instinct from those Montana summers rose up inside him, louder than his fear. He did not run. He stood still. Then, slowly, he began walking forward, straight toward the beast. General Vorik Thane saw it happen through a scout drone feed relayed to his command tent 3 kilometers away. At first, he assumed a system error. No living creature walked toward a Draxol. It went against every instinct known to exist in the galaxy. He ordered the feed checked twice. Both times, the image showed the same thing. One human, alone, walking calmly across open ground, directly into the path of the most dangerous predator Colindrian history had ever recorded. "Get him out of there," Vorik Thane snapped over comms. "Somebody get that human out of there now." But nobody could reach Ethan in time. The nearest vehicle was already half a kilometer away, its driver too frightened to turn back. Every soldier who might have helped was running for their life in the opposite direction. Ethan was completely alone, and completely exposed, in front of a beast that had already proven it could tear through solid rock. According to later coalition reports, this was the exact moment the general's fear changed shape. He was no longer afraid only of the Draxol. He had studied that creature for 2 days. He understood, at least in theory, how it thought and how it hunted. But he had no idea, none at all, what this one human soldier was doing, or why he was doing it, or what he expected to happen next. For the first time in his long military career, General Vorik Thane was watching something he could not predict. Ethan kept walking. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the sound of his own boots on broken stone. Every part of his training screamed that this was insane. But another part of him, the part shaped by those Montana summers, kept whispering the same 3 words his father used to say. "Do not run." The Draxol's massive head swung toward him. For a moment, the beast seemed confused. Every other creature on this battlefield had done exactly what its instincts expected. They ran. Running told the Draxol who to chase, who was weak, who was prey. This one figure was doing something completely different, and the beast's ancient brain did not have a clear answer for what that meant. It slowed its charge, just slightly, turning its full attention toward the one thing on the field that had not fled. Back at command, General Vorik Thane leaned forward, gripping the edge of his console so tightly his knuckles paled. His science officer, a nervous young Colindrian named Ressa, stood beside him, eyes wide. "General," she said quietly, "the Draxol is not attacking him." "I can see that," Vorik Thane said. "I do not understand why." Neither did Ethan. Not fully. He only knew what his father had taught him, and what every documentary he had ever watched about predator behavior on Earth had shown him. Confidence, or something close enough to it, changed the equation. It was not a guarantee. It was a gamble. But standing still, running, and fighting were the only 3 choices he had, and 2 of those 3 had already gotten every other soldier on this field into deep trouble. So he chose the 3rd option. He walked closer, slow and steady, keeping his hands visible, keeping his movements smooth, refusing to let his fear show in his body, even as it roared inside his chest. The beast let out a sound unlike anything the coalition's sensors had ever recorded, a deep rolling growl that shook loose dust from the canyon walls. It took one heavy step forward, then stopped again, watching this strange, small creature that refused to behave the way every instinct told it prey should behave. General Vorik Thane watched the feed in silence. In that moment, something shifted inside him, something he would not fully understand until much later. He had spent 2 days afraid of an ancient monster built by nature to kill anything that ran from it. Now he realized he should have spent those 2 days studying something else entirely. He should have been studying humans. Word of what was happening spread through the coalition camp faster than any official report could travel. Soldiers who had reached safety turned back to watch, some through binoculars, some through drone feeds pulled up on handheld screens. Nobody could quite believe what they were seeing. A single human, unarmed except for a sidearm he had not even drawn, standing in open ground in front of a living legend. Ethan was close enough now to see the Draxol's eyes clearly. They were a deep amber color, and they were locked directly onto him. Up close, the beast was even larger than it had looked from a distance, its shoulders alone taller than a small building. Its breath came out in heavy clouds, hot against the cool morning air. Every instinct in Ethan's body told him to run. He ignored it, the same way he had ignored it every step since the beast first appeared. He kept his hands open and low. He kept his pace slow. He forced his breathing to stay even, though his heart felt like it was trying to break through his ribs. He remembered something else from those Montana summers, something his father had told him more than once. Predators read fear through movement and scent, not through thoughts. An animal cannot know what you are feeling inside. It can only see what your body does. If your body stays calm, sometimes, just sometimes, the animal believes the lie before the truth catches up. So Ethan lied with his body. He stood tall. He did not flinch when the Draxol huffed and stamped one massive foot, sending a shockwave of dust rolling across the ground. At command, Ressa was running numbers on her console, trying to make sense of what her instruments were showing. General, its heart rate has not spiked toward attack thresholds. It is reading as confused, almost curious. Curious, Vorik Thane repeated. He had commanded soldiers in over 40 campaigns. He had never once heard that word used to describe a Draxol. Down on the field, Ethan took another step. He was now close enough that he could see the old scars crossing the beast's hide, deep grooves left by something powerful, something that had fought this creature before and lost. He wondered, briefly, what kind of history this animal carried, how long it had survived here, alone, feared by every living thing that crossed its path. That thought changed something in him. Fear was still there, thick in his throat, but underneath it, something else was growing. Not confidence exactly. Understanding. This beast was not evil. It was not choosing cruelty. It was simply doing what it had always done, reacting to a world that had taught it, over thousands of years, that anything that ran was dangerous and anything that ran was food. It did not know any other way to be. Ethan stopped walking. He was close enough now that another step would put him well within striking range of those massive horns. He stood still, arms slightly raised, palms open, the same posture his father had shown him years ago when they once crossed paths with a grizzly on a quiet mountain trail. The Draxol lowered its head slightly, horns angled toward him, muscles coiling along its shoulders. This was the moment every soldier watching believed the beast would finally charge. General Vorik Thane's hand hovered over the comm switch, ready to order suppressive fire, even though he knew it might come too late. Even though he knew it might do nothing at all against hide that thick. His fingers trembled slightly, something he had not felt in decades of command. "Hold," he said instead, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hold fire. Do not startle it." Nobody was entirely sure why he gave that order. Perhaps some old instinct of his own recognized that firing now, breaking this strange standoff, might only guarantee the worst outcome. Perhaps he simply did not know what else to do. For the first time in his career, the general was not commanding the situation. He was watching it unfold, helpless, the same as everyone else. Ethan kept his eyes on the beasts, not staring hard enough to seem like a challenge, but not looking away either. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a strange calm had settled over him, the kind of calm his instructors back on Earth used to talk about. The state soldiers sometimes reached when fear stopped being useful and something quieter took its place. He spoke, quietly, almost without meaning to. His voice was steady, low, meant more for himself than for the creature in front of him. "I'm not running," he said. "I'm not fighting you either. I just need you to let my people go." Of course, the Draxel understood no human language, but something in the tone, low and even and without panic, seemed to reach it anyway. The beast's ears, half hidden beneath heavy armor plating, flicked forward, tracking the sound. For 3 long seconds, nothing moved. The wind carried dust across the open ground between them. Somewhere behind Ethan, a soldier who had crept back to watch whispered a prayer under his breath. Then, slowly, the Draxel took 1 step back. Nobody at command believed what they were seeing at first. Reza checked her sensors twice, certain something had malfunctioned, but the readings held steady. The Draxel, a creature that had never once retreated from living thing in over 2,000 years of recorded and unrecorded history, had taken a step backward from a single unarmed human. General Vorik Thane stood frozen at his console, watching the feed with an expression his officers had never seen on him before. It was not relief. It was something closer to disbelief mixed with a growing, uncomfortable understanding. Down on the field, Ethan did not move. He had learned enough from his father's lessons to know that this moment was fragile. One wrong motion, one sudden noise, could still shatter whatever strange balance had formed between him and the beast. So he stayed still, breathing slow, watching the Draxel's massive chest rise and fall with each heavy breath. The beast studied him a while longer. Then, unexpectedly, it lowered its head, not in a striking posture this time, but low and loose, almost the way a large dog lowers its head when it is uncertain rather than aggressive. It let out a long breath through its nose, sound closer to a sigh than a growl. Ethan had spent enough time around animals in his life to recognize a shift in behavior when he saw one. This was not surrender. This was uncertainty. The beast no longer saw him as something to chase, but it did not yet know what he was instead. He decided to test something. Slowly, carefully, he crouched down, lowering his own body height, making himself smaller and less threatening, the exact opposite instinct most soldiers would follow in a combat situation. It was a risk. But everything about this encounter had been a risk from the first step he took. The Draxel's head tilted, studying him with something that, if Ethan didn't know better, looked almost like curiosity. Behind him, faint but growing louder, he could hear the sound of engines. A single scout vehicle, driven by a young Colindrian soldier named Tovik, had circled back despite every order to retreat. Tovik had watched the entire encounter from a ridge above the canyon, and something about it had pulled him back down onto the field, against his own fear, against his own training. The engine noise startled the Draxel slightly. Its head snapped up, ears flattening, and for one terrifying second, Ethan feared the fragile calm was about to break completely. "Stop the engine," Ethan called out, not looking away from the beast. "Cut it now." Tovik obeyed instantly, killing the engine and letting the vehicle roll silently to a stop nearby. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by wind and the beast's heavy breathing. Ethan slowly rose back to his feet, keeping his movements smooth and unhurried. He took one careful step to the side, angling his body away from the direct path back toward the coalition lines, not toward the beast, not away from it, simply to the side, an invitation rather than a retreat. The Draxel watched him do this. Then, in a moment that would later be studied and argued over by coalition scientists for years, it turned its massive body and began walking, unhurried, back toward the canyon it had come from. It paused once, glancing back at Ethan with those deep amber eyes, before continuing on, disappearing behind the same ridge of broken stone it had shattered less than 15 minutes earlier. For a long moment, nobody on the battlefield moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind and the distant hum of Tovik's cooling engine. Then, slowly, soldiers who had run began creeping back out from behind rocks and vehicles, staring at Ethan as though seeing him for the first time. Some looked at him with confusion. Others looked at him with something closer to fear, though not fear of the beast anymore. At command, General Vorik Thane sat down slowly in his chair, something he almost never did during an active engagement. Ressa stood beside him, silent, unable to find the right words for what her instruments had just recorded. "Sir," she finally said, "what just happened?" Vorik Thane did not answer right away. He was still watching the feed, still watching Ethan Cole standing alone in that open field, unarmed, unharmed, having somehow talked down a creature that Colindrian legend said could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped, could not be understood. "I do not know," the general admitted quietly. "But I know this. That creature has survived on this planet for longer than our written history exists. It has never once backed away from a living thing before today." He paused, watching Ethan slowly begin walking back toward the coalition lines, soldiers rushing out to meet him, disbelief written across every face. "Today," Vorik Thane said, "it backed away from a human." Word of what happened at the Eastern Canyon reached the rest of the coalition camp within the hour. By nightfall, it had reached command centers on 3 different ships in orbit. By the next morning, coalition scientists across the sector were requesting full sensor data on the encounter, eager to understand something that broke every rule their species had ever recorded about the Draxel's behavior. Ethan Cole did not think of himself as a hero. When soldiers gathered around him back at camp, asking questions, wanting to know exactly what he had been thinking, he found it hard to explain. He kept coming back to the same simple answer. "I just didn't run," he said. That's really all it was. But General Vorik Thane understood there was more to it than that, even if Ethan himself did not fully see it yet. That evening, the general requested a private meeting with the young sergeant, something almost unheard of between a Colindrian commander and a human soldier of his rank. They met in the general's quarters, a simple room lit by the soft orange glow of Ember 9's setting sun through a narrow window. Vorik Thane studied Ethan for a long moment before speaking. "I have commanded soldiers for over 40 years, the general said. I have studied every known predator species across 12 systems. I have fought wars against enemies with weapons far beyond anything your people possessed only a century ago. In all that time, I have never once seen anything like what happened today." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, sir, I got lucky. If that thing had charged, I'd be dead." "Perhaps," Vorik Thane admitted. "But luck does not explain why you walked forward while every trained soldier under my command, myself included, felt an instinct so strong it overrode years of discipline. Luck does not explain how you understood, in the middle of that chaos, exactly how to move, exactly how to speak, exactly how to make yourself smaller instead of larger when the moment called for it." He leaned forward slightly. "I began studying your species' history after today's events, Sergeant Cole. I learned something that troubles me deeply. Humans evolved on a world full of predators far more dangerous, relative to your size and strength, than anything my people ever faced. For most of your history, you were not the strongest creatures on your planet. You survived not through strength, but through understanding, through patience, through knowing exactly when to stand still and when to move." Ethan said nothing, letting the general continue. "The Draxol is dangerous because it is unpredictable to us," Vorik Thane said. "But it is not unpredictable to something that grew up needing to understand predators simply to stay alive. That is what frightens me, Sergeant. Not the beast. The beast, I now understand, at least a little. What I do not understand is what else your species knows, quietly, instinctively, that mine has never needed to learn." It was, in its own way, an admission the general had never expected to make. He had come to Ember 9 believing humans were useful allies, valuable for their adaptability and their willingness to fight. He was leaving that meeting with a very different understanding, one that unsettled him far more than any battle ever had. Over the following weeks, the Eastern Canyon remained quiet. The Draxol was never seen again, though sensor readings occasionally picked up distant movement deep in the rock formations, a reminder that it was still out there, still watching, still choosing not to return. Coalition scientists eventually developed new protocols based on what they had learned that day. Protocols built around calm, controlled movement rather than retreat when facing certain predator species. Those protocols would go on to save lives on other worlds, in other encounters nobody could have predicted. Ethan Cole returned to his regular duties within days, quietly, without seeking attention. He never fully understood why the moment made him something of a legend among coalition forces, why alien soldiers who had never spoken to him before began nodding respectfully whenever he passed. He simply remembered his father's voice from all those summers ago in the Montana mountains, teaching him a lesson that had nothing to do with alien beasts or interstellar wars, and everything to do with understanding fear well enough to walk through it instead of away from it. General Vorik Thane never forgot that day either. In his private reports, filed only within the highest levels of coalition command, he wrote a single line that would later be quoted by military historians studying early human alliance cooperation. "The beast was dangerous," he wrote, "but it was known. The human was something else entirely. And that is what should concern us most." Here is the part most people miss when they hear this story. Ethan Cole was not chosen for that mission because he was special. He was not the strongest soldier in the human expeditionary corps. He was not the most decorated. He was, by every official measurement, simply average. That is exactly what unsettled General Vorik Thane the most, once the shock of that day had faded. If an ordinary human, with nothing more than a childhood lesson about grizzly bears, could stand calm in front of a creature that had terrified his soldiers for 2 days, what might an extraordinary human do? What might an entire trained division of them do, facing something even greater? The beast, in the end, was simply a beast. Ancient, dangerous, but limited by instincts written into it over thousands of years. It could be studied. It could, eventually, be understood. A human being who chose, in a single terrifying moment, to override every instinct screaming at him to run, and instead walk calmly toward danger because his mind told him it was the right thing to do, was something far harder to predict, and far harder to explain. That is why the title of this story is not about the monster at all. The general's worst nightmare was never the beast in the canyon. It was the quiet realization that humanity's greatest strength might not be weapons, or ships, or numbers, but something far simpler and far more dangerous: the will to stay calm when every instinct says to run. If this opened your eye to a different side of the HFY universe, you are going to want to see what comes next. Let's bring it back to where we started. An entire army ran from a monster that day, and nobody blamed them for it. Running was the sane choice. But one ordinary soldier chose differently, not because he was fearless, but because he understood fear well enough to walk through it. And in doing so, he taught a general who had commanded for 40 years something no battle ever had. The most unpredictable force in the galaxy might not be the ancient beast hiding in the canyon. It might be the quiet, steady human standing next to you. That is the heart of every great HFY story. Humanity is never the biggest, never the strongest, never the most advanced species out there. But again and again, in story after story, humans win not through power, but through understanding, patience, and the refusal to give up when giving up would be easier. If this story gave you chills, or if it made you see the HFY genre a little differently, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love these stories as much as you do. If you are new here, consider subscribing. We publish new HFY Sci-Fi stories like this one every single week, each one built around the same idea: ordinary humans facing extraordinary odds and finding a way through. I also want to hear from you. In the comments, tell me this. If you were standing in Ethan's place, facing that beast alone, do you think you could have stayed calm? Or do you think you would have run like everyone else? Type your honest answer below. I read every single one. And if this story pulled you in, there is another one waiting for you next. One that might just be even harder to walk away from. Click it now, and I will see you there.